welcome back. I'm Gary Parr.
And I'm Beth Ellicott.
And you are listening to Fiber Talk, the twice-weekly podcast for needlework artists. Our artist this week, Marie-Renee Otis. Marie-Renee, welcome.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Beth.
We have a whole new world with your art today, and I use the word art in its purest form. Wow, you take needlework to a new level. It was so much fun going through your gallery, and people who are listening, if you don't go through her gallery, you're missing out. It's really something. So I look at your work, and we'll talk about your work in a minute, but there's so much going on, and what happens in my head is I see all of those elements, the beads, the shells, all the different pieces in addition to the thread and just about every technique in the world. And there's potential, and I've seen this with some, to use all of those elements and it becomes a visual mess. But
visual mess?
Yeah. But you don't do that at all. You bring all those pieces together, and it is a visual pleasure. I mean, it's pure art. Is there clearly is an art background to you? A lot of years of studying art.
Yeah, and it started very early. Starting at 6 years old, I was going every week to the nuns, and they went out of their ways, those nuns, for us kids to use different tools, to learn different technique. We touched mosaic, ink, leather, papier-mâché, all kind of things. And really those studies, those courses had a real and strong impact on me. Mm-hmm. Because when it was the time to determine what I wanted to do in my life, it was natural that I wanted to continue in art.
So the nuns then basically gave you all the opportunity to explore and learn and try things and ask that famous question, what if I do this and what if I do that?
Yeah, I have a souvenir of freedom, of technique, of things to learn, of a purpose for a work. Just an example, a decoration for Christmas, a decoration that we will put in the middle of a table so it will be beautiful. Okay, so the sense of a purpose and to add beauty. I think that was the purpose, to add beauty through techniques and materials.
So it wasn't just playing. You were taught that it's more than just play, but to create something beautiful for the eye, soul.
Yeah. It's not playing. It's not a word that comes to my mind. But, I started at 6 years old, so I bet they had a lot of educational skills. So it was as a playing ground. And I remember vividly the image of the atelier where we were working, and large drawers, very narrow, just for the large paper with all the colors. It was beautiful. And you know what? Later on, I really tried to imitate this atelier with my own.
So the whole creativity and art thing was in you from the beginning and all the way through school. Nothing drew you away from that. It was always, I'll do the math and I'll do the science, but get me to the art room.
Yeah, and I presume my parents saw through me that I had a desire and a natural ability to do that, because we are 4 sisters in my family, and one was into music and the other one was in something else, the third one in sport. So we all had different direction, and I was the one who was at those courses. So I bet my parents saw that through me.
Right, but they encouraged each in their gifts, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So when I decided that I would continue in arts, I went to Quebec City at the Cégep for 2 years in arts. And it's at the Cégep that there were one course, exploration of material. So we worked with wood, with clay, with metal, with fiber, and it was love at first sight, at first touch with the fibers. So it really determined which university I would go. I would continue in fine arts. And that was in Trois-Rivières, between Montreal and Quebec, because at that university, there were loom atelier. I was able to learn the Gobelin style weaving, and I loved it.
You got it all. You got it all. Excellent.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I loved it so much that after weaving many hours at night, I started to do embroidery by myself. And if I compare weaving with embroidery, weaving, we must know, on doit prévoir, we must determine what will be at the end, because it's fabricated one line at a time. Compare with embroidery, where I can put the thread up, right, down, in every direction. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, because once you start weaving, you got to stick with it, the pattern, and it just becomes a rhythmic thing. Where with embroidery, at some point you can change courses and convert it into something else. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I started to do embroidery by myself because there were much more freedom in the way I could put the thread, and also freedom not to have a big loom to carry. Just a little small embroidery in my purse would do the thing, and I could do embroidery in the park. So all kinds of freedom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, weaving isn't exactly mobile. No, it's not. Did the weaving just get left aside, or is that something you still have an interest in?
No, Gary, I have only one life, So at one point, I really needed to make a choice. I was not able to conduct both because, of course, after university, I had my kids. And again, as time was shorter, I really decided that it was the embroidery that I would keep because it was more fun, more freedom once again. And so the decision was easy to make.
Yeah. Was there a technique that you started with? Was it just a basic surface embroidery that you started with? Or did you try various techniques? How did you approach that?
Actually, no technique at all, Just to give you an example, I did not know nothing about embroidery, but I wanted to use the thread, the thread with my creativity. So the exact first one, I used a large fabric that covers material on a truck, so sturdy, so big, so difficult. But I have done my project up to the end, and it did not discourage me. So he said it's a good example that I will be able to continue. Oh, yeah, it was so difficult. And then I experienced other fabric, and rapidly I discovered the Penelope canvas. Penelope canvas.
Penelope?
You know what
Penelope canvas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So the weft and the wrap are very regular, and it was easy to make very straight stitches. And I started like this. I was covering the whole canvas. I loved it. First with very long stitches. I was kind of in a hurry to cover the canvas. And later on, actually at the birth of my first child, I said, well, I will not have as much time, so I will continue to do embroidery just for my own pleasure. And that was the starting point to make small stitches, very small, the smallest I could do on the canvas. At the birth of my second child, same thought. I will not have much time, but I will continue just for the pleasure of it. And I started to compose my own color. It was always with this stranded cotton with the 6 thread, but I could use 6 different color of thread. So I ended up with such a large array of color because I was composing my own color. Mm-hmm. After that, very small stitches and an array of color, unlimited palette of color. I was able to do a lot of shading, a lot of dégradé, and really my technical style was starting to be seen.
I was curious, actually I was surprised, but also curious that you used Penelope canvas. I mean, that used to be fairly widely used many, many years ago, and these days you hardly hear of it. And you use it a lot. What is it because it gives you so much variety in terms of holes you can use that draws you to it? And where do you get it? I got to believe it's hard to get a hold of.
Yeah, from now on it is difficult to get. Well, at that time, there were more stores, and you know, when you buy a few meters, it takes a while to go and use it all because my pieces are not that big. The Penelope canvas, we can use it as a ordinary fabric or as the canvas with the advantage of the holes. Okay, with the holes, mm-hmm. I can do a very regular stitches, but if I use it only like in ordinary fabric, then I can add any elements and I can put the thread in a direction. So it has lots of advantage. That's what I think.
Flexibility, you mean, it just so many options for you just because of the way that it's structured.
Yeah, and especially for the background. If I want to do a very elaborate background, that's perfect. Because anyway, the canvas has to be covered completely. It's not a beautiful fabric to be seen, so it has to be covered. Yeah.
So start adding like what I would call found objects onto your pieces. Jewelry.
Well, almost at the start, really early. Let's say really early, and the first object that I added was metallic thread and also feather from birds, elements of nature. And then beads came in, and then sequins came in, and then jewelry came in. Yeah.
I mean, it just adds such a beautiful texture to your pieces, and it adds to the story, I think, is what
I agree with you. I agree. And also from one moment, those objects had their own stories. And for me, it added soul to my pieces. Even if the person who buys it or sees it does not know the exact story, I believe that through the ethereal world, they could sense it, feel it. Okay? So
Right.
it was really for the pleasure to add those beautiful items, and also behind to add soul, because it has a story behind it. I would just wanted to add that the story that I'm referring to is that they comes from different country, different culture, from someone who stopped at my atelier and gave it to me, or it's a loom, it's a part of an heritage, okay? So it has a special meaning, but especially when it comes from in another country. It's a direct link with other culture. It's a direct link with other women or men who are working with fiber and fabric and this family of material. So it's really a link with universality.
Do I read it correctly? I mean, you can see in your schoolwork the exposure that you were given to so many materials. So you're not taught out of the gate that we only use cotton thread to do embroidery. That you're seeing all kinds of materials to work with to create art. But then you also had some experiences that I assume influenced you. Your time in South Korea and in Bangui in Central Africa. Did I say that right? And
Yeah.
so you have some other cultural exposures that I assume really added to and influenced your whole approach to your art.
Oh, when we travel, especially to a country that has such a different culture than ours, it is always very important. If we start with Korea, South Korea, it's been 20 years I've been there, okay? I don't know how it has evolved, but I spent 1 month there with an Korean artist, and it was a very modern city. I thought that I would see all people with their bicycles. Not at all. Not at all. We had to go way into the countryside to see a bicycle. But it was such an important trip because they have good values, the importance of the old age people, the importance of their teacher, and also the living national treasure, people who have spent their life contributing to keep a cultural technique or things. And Mrs. Shin, where I was staying with her husband, she was a contemporary artist in weaving, and she knew lots of young artists, and she was well appreciated. So we met many people. We visited so many museums, starting from big and very modern building museum up to a tiny one, so tiny that it's a cabinet in one house, and the cabinet is the museum. So it was wonderful. And Mrs. Shin was so proud and interested in her own culture. So every guided tour, we visited many shrine, temple, a lot of things to learn about their culture. And one thing that impressed me a lot from Mrs. Shin, she was playing with material, all kind of things. And this playing period was just a way for her to be able to go deeper into her creativity. And after playing in a couple of hours, now she was ready to do her own weaving things. I thought it was extraordinary. And you know, I can resume or I can summarize in one word: work, 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 all the time.
So it's like practice makes perfect sort of thing that we hear.
Yeah.
You can't just say, well, I'm going to try this once, and I'm going to, if I'm done. It's a matter of keeping at it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So she would play with objects. It sounds like it was kind of a meditative process for her for up to 2 hours before she would start.
Something like this.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it almost becomes a Zen kind of entering another world thing for her then.
Yeah.
Wow.
And she was living, they didn't have no children. So, and her husband was an architect. So the whole house was their studio and atelier, all packed with things. And she had buckets of broken ceramics, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And she would play with that and integrate with paper or put paint on it. Just play and experiment with that, which has nothing to do with her weaving.
Yeah.
But it was only to expand her creativity. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
when you make a trip like that and see another culture and art, and I don't know if this is going to come out right, but I'm going to try. Do you approach it as a sponge in that you just take it in, or do you, everything you see and learn, do you try to relate it to what you already know? If that makes sense. I mean, do you just take it in and absorb it and sort it out later? How do you take that information in? Because I mean, that just what you described there has to just be an overload, a mental overload of information in a month.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's hard to sleep, and the process after that, you know, up till now, I'm still imprégné, I'm still influenced by that trip. And what stays in me, one example of what stays in me is the immense respect for the workers in the fiber field. I will give you an example. We went to a special part of Seoul, the capital, in a quartier where all the buildings are devoted to workers in fiber, whether it's to make t-shirts, to do machine embroidery for whatever items. So we visited one of those buildings, but there were a lot of them, many floors. Picture one area of one floor of one building, and from the floor to the ceiling, it's covered with pile and pile of thread and fabric. In the middle of those piles, there is a machine, a very noisy sewing machine. The worker is there. Sometimes you see some kids sleeping in a corner, and there is a circus of people bringing food because those workers does not leave their machine. It was a kind of hell, let me tell you that. And I really am so respectful now for anything related with fiber, because I know that behind there is somebody who works very hard. So I bought many material over there, many threads.
Gotta help them out, yeah.
Whenever I use them, my thought goes to them. Same thing with Bangui. Okay, Bangui at the Central African Republic. I've been there 3 times. Not for a long time. The longest was 1 month, but every time it's a cultural shock, really. And when I came back home, the first thing was, oh, thank you, God, I have water in my pipe, hot water and cold water, as much as I want. Because those people, I was working in a school of arts, and my colleagues, the teacher and the students, they were walking a long time to get to the school. And I suspect that many of them didn't have much food, you know. And it was a very noisy and polluted city. And I admired them so much. And especially when I went there, can you imagine the stress? Because they were about to have their 7th attempt of coup d'etat.
Oh.
It's a nightmare every day. And actually, the last time I went, we never know, will we have to get out of the country urgently, or can we stay until the end of the mission because of those political turmoil? So I admire those artists because they don't have much tool, they don't have much material, and it's a daily struggle for them.
But through it all, they want to do the art.
Yeah, it's a desire, it's a need, it's an impulse. It's wonderful to see that. So once again, I brought back many materials that I could find on the little market. And for me, Gary and Miss Ellicott, I do not mind if the material I'm using is very cheap or very costly. It has nothing to do. It's really what they bring with them. It's what I recall of them, the culture, where they come from. And anyway, it will be in an embroidery that will be covered with a glass and a frame, so it will be protected. Do you understand?
Right.
Yes. Because each of those pieces, all the material you bring to it, it tells part of the story.
Yeah, exactly. So the kori, kori that I brought back from Africa, the shell.
Cowrie shell, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cowrie shell, yeah. So it has a very strong meaningful for me when I use them.
And that's the one sad thing about the pandemic is that travel has stopped, and not being able to physically go other places. There's something about being in a different place, even if it's something similar. It's still you experience a different culture, different from where you are, and I think it kind of feeds the artist, I guess.
Oh, you are so right. And I can relate to what you're saying, especially with the embroidery courses that I took. While the pandemic, I have done a couple of courses on the internet, and it's in my home, of course. But all the courses that I took when I was in France, for instance, in Europe or in Great Britain, okay, what does it smell in Paris? What kind of food do we have? The regulation at that particular atelier. Okay, it's the connection with the other students, with the teacher. It's a million little things that tells you what kind of culture I'm in and what importance it has on the way we do embroidery.
Yes. I took a class at the Royal School of Needlework. We went to London, and that was the one thing I wanted to do. and I could still remember looking out the window at the gardens. And it's just such an impression in my mind that that's not going to go, that doesn't go away. You know, the walking in the rain in London and getting tea with my family. It brings on a feeling that you can't get, that if you're sitting in your own home taking a class online. It feeds another part of you, I think, when you travel and experience other things.
Are you referring to the round window?
No, I think it was a square window right in the classroom, and I looked out that window and I could see the back gardens.
Okay. I don't know about you, but I was getting lost in the corridor because this castle is so big.
Yes. Oh, and the fence in the back, my daughter was with me, and I took a bunch of pictures of her back there along that back fence line where you could see the Thames River. And again, those memories and being with her, spending time with my daughter, and it just brings back memories that, you know, you can't always capture in any other way, you know. And it does feed you somehow. It feeds the soul.
Absolutely.
Tell me about white spruce root. I did not understand that when I read about white spruce root.
Fascinating material, Gary. So I took a course of embroidery, traditional Aboriginal embroidery with a Algonquin lady, beautiful Algonquin lady. So we worked with porcupine quills, with moose hair, and with the white spruce root. I loved it. Okay, first you prepare what you wanted to embroider, to stitch on. Okay, so once it's prepared, you go out in the forest, you identify this white spruce, and then you go at the roots and you dig, because you need to get to the finest roots that you can get. Once you have them, you peel them, you put it on your needle. It's exactly like a big white thread, and you sew what you wanted to sew before. And it's that easy. You stitch with that root, but the difference is that once it is dry, it will never move. It will stay there forever. And I loved it. The only difficulty is that I don't remember what a white spruce looks like. And I presume I don't have them in my area. So I'm joking, but it's the difficulty to get the little roots. But it was a wonderful material. You see, when I take those courses, it's mainly to satisfy my curiosity and in my heart to blend all those wonderful techniques, and once again to be in connection with all those people who use different way of doing embroidery. And back home, back in my studio, I may do a little thing or two, or maybe more, but I don't intend to continue using those techniques for the rest of my life, okay? Mm-hmm. So I have worked with the porcupine quills, with the moose hair, and with the white spruce roots for 2 or 3 works. And then it's fine and it's fun, wonderful, and I try something else.
Yeah. Well, but I can see just in you telling these stories and having studied your art you can see now. I start to see the influences and why there is such variety in all of your pieces. You have so many varied influences that you really have an awful lot to draw from in terms of your own creativity.
Yeah, it's adding tools to my capacity of doing embroidery. It's really that, new tools.
All right, what's it like to stitch with moose hair?
Very difficult. Very. First, because they are not that long. I mean, 4 inches at the maximum.
Uh-huh.
And then the technique that is most traditional is to do pompon with them. Okay.
Okay.
You know pompon is?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And I never succeeded to make a fully pompon, very round and beautiful. So, yeah. And once again, where do I get moose hair?
Yeah, I want to know how mad the moose get when you take their hair.
At that time, my studio was open to the public, so all kinds of people were coming in, and I loved to speak with them. And one day, eventually, I was saying to my visitors, I need some moose hair. Where do I get moose hair? And one of the ladies says, oh, my husband is a hunter, so in a few months, I will bring you moose hair. And indeed, a whole box full of moose hair.
Oh, my.
You know, you have, maybe you have an idea, but I wanted to say you have no idea how people are generous.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They want to participate. Whenever you ask anything, you get lots of them. It's amazing.
Right.
A box of moose hair. The only person I've ever met or will ever meet who owns a box of moose hair. Okay. Your art, so much of your art is, as you describe it, strong women and mythological figures. Where does that, what part of your brain drives that? Because you really, just in looking at it, my mind just starts to wander in looking at your art, especially the mythological features. What story are you telling? You know, who are these people? What is their role in the world? And where does that come from?
Yeah, good question.
Okay.
I also have done some studies in art therapy. I did not want to become an art therapist, but I wanted to explore other ways of inspiration. And it leads me to unconscious. So what is in my unconscious? And what I do is that I just take the pencil and I push the pencil and whatever I will draw will be fine. And those figures, those big ladies, those big women comes out of my pen, of my unconscious. I also see that as a reference to my family. I told you that I have 3 sisters, and my mother was a very important woman in my hometown. She has led many projects, social projects. She has worked with all kinds of people. So she has made a lot of good thing in my community. And she was a wonderful role model for me. And once again, when you travel abroad, in poor countries especially, you see how women, they hold the world in their arms. They have such an amazing and important role. So it all comes through those windows, you know. And finally, the archetype of Mother Earth. And here in my hometown, we have a strong connection with nature. Nature that is feeding us, nature that we need to protect. So that big, large, powerful lady, I think it's the archetype, the representation of Mother Earth, protection. Yeah, I see that. Nature has a big role in my work also. At the beginning, I was adding feather, coquillage, snail, different kind of things. And now, from my window, I see two huge mountains. I see the St. Lawrence. I see the Bay of Baie-Saint-Paul with strong tides. Twice a day, the bay is completely empty, and twice a day, the bay is completely full of water. So in my own personal life, whenever it's a problem, I say to myself, okay, it's a low tide in my life. There will be a high tide later. Okay.
Right.
And we live in a very particular area, very mountain, and those mountain protects us. I clearly see that from my window. Whenever we see very dark clouds coming in, whoops, they are stopped by the mountains and diverted. So we are protected. And do not forget that our area has been made by a meteorite that struck our area 350 million years ago. But we live in a scar of the earth caused by a meteorite. It's a wonderful story, isn't it?
Yeah. So I can see how you get inspiration just sitting in your own home. Yes.
Absolutely. But Gary, with the counterpart that it has feebled the crust of the earth, and from time to time we are more prone to earthquake. Okay.
Like that, I wouldn't like earthquake.
Talk about your process a little bit. First, the first question is, you talked about covering the ground cloth, the canvas, completely. And I was commenting to Beth as we were researching you, it looks like most of your backgrounds, or at least a large portion of your backgrounds, look like you're couching down a thread but covering it 100%. What is that stitch that you're using there, or how are you doing that? Because it really looks like couching to me, because these straight horizontal lines, and I couldn't figure out what you're doing.
When it's on the Penelope canvas, it's a needle point, okay? It's stitching. When it's on another kind of fabric, I don't cover the whole background because the fabric has a role to play. Special colors, special weaving, okay, special design that will enhance the embroidery, something like this. But when it's all covered, it's Penelope canvas. I love couching stitch. Yeah. Especially because with the couching, we can use very fragile thread, very thick thread, a combination of many small thread, okay? It's easier. We just lay them down and we keep them in place. I really like the couching stitch. I try to see which work you are referring to.
Well, there are just several of them where your background or your solid spaces are these horizontal lines of, it looks like thread wrapped around another thread. and at least visually it does in the photos. And so I was just trying to figure out what you were doing there. But
are they work where all the background is completely covered?
yes.
Then it's on the canvas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And you're couching it then.
Not could be some parts, but otherwise it's the stitches as like a needle point.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I get it now. Yeah. All right. I just had to know that. Yeah. So what is your approach to any given piece of art? Is it a photograph, a drawing, an idea in your head that you just start stitching and let it evolve as you go? How do you go about creating these pieces of art?
Mm,
It depends.
I'm always
She's going to say
curious.
it depends. I know she is.
No, I wanted to say that depending on the theme of a specific exhibition I'm interested in participating, okay? Let's take that example.
Okay.
We have a theme, so my drawings would be around that theme, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a specific goal to participate in that exhibition. Once the drawing is determined, I will transfer it to the fabric, which I have decided which fabric I will use. And then I mount it on the loom, embroidery loom. And then I open up the cabinet, the drawer, and I see, ooh, what kind of material can I use? And what kind of stitches can I use? And the array of color. And I try to see that in my head. Actually, I try to see the final result in my head. I do not see the whole thing. But once I see one portion of it, once I have a certitude, something I'm sure, as an example, the clothing of the personage will be red. So I start with the red, and progressively I will stitch it, I will think about it, and progressively what's around that red will come up. So it's really a work in progress. When I have a specific goal. But sometimes I just draw for the pleasure of it. And it's a mixture of little bits and pieces of things on the same drawing. And once I'd like to start a new embroidery, I will pick up one portion of that drawing. I will enlarge it, and then it will be the starting point for the embroidery. I rarely use photograph, except if I want to have something very accurate. For example, I want to stitch some butterflies, but I want them to be very precise. So I will take a look at a photograph, okay? But otherwise, I prefer to do it from my head and from my heart and from my soul.
Well, those are three fascinating places because what comes out of them is just gorgeous work. It really is.
And you know what, Gary? I will, and you, Miss Alicott, I will tell you a secret. My definite purpose in doing embroidery, and I have done it for 40 years and more than 40 years, with always the same pleasure. So my real purpose, real goal, is to lift up my soul and to lift up somebody else's soul with my work, and to participate in the beauty of our world.
And I think your work does that. I think when I looked at it, I just wanted to get deeper in, and I found great joy in looking at your pieces and looking through your gallery of your projects. They're beautiful, and yet they feed something else too. They do feed the soul.
Oh, Thank you. Thank you.
No, she's right. There's an extra thing. There's an extra thing when you look at your work that initially I couldn't put my finger on, but boy, it spoke to me too. I know what you mean, Beth. It really feeds something extra beyond just looking at some needlework. Yes.
Right. It's not just, okay, yes, that's pretty, or, I enjoy it. You can see the stories behind it. And I think that's what intrigues me, is that you can see that there's, even if you don't know the story, the piece tells a story. And when I looked at, I think it's called, you have jewelry in it, that's, First Nation jewelry. And it's called something seeds, like, in English, planting seeds, maybe.
Oui. Yeah.
And that one speaks to me a lot, because I was born in New Mexico, and my parents had relationships with the Navajo, and they would actually buy jewelry from them, resell it, because that people would, a long story, but basically, my parents developed a relationship and would buy jewelry, and then people would want to buy the jewelry from them. And so when I see those pieces, it evokes in my own head stories of my childhood, people that intertwined with my family, and the culture there. And I just think that, so to me, it tells my part of my story, even though obviously we didn't know each other when you made this piece, but it tells a story.
Well, it's the power of art to connect people.
So true. Yep. Marie-Renee, this has been, really fun. Thank you for doing this. Really enjoy it.
Oh, Gary and Miss Ellicott, I can see how experienced interviewer you are. You make me at ease, and it was a real pleasure for me too. Thank you so much.
Well, we really enjoyed learning about your art and how it comes together and what's behind it. It really, it really is good. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. And thanks to everybody for listening.